We're often taught that to influence a room, you have to be the loudest one in it, that your presence is some kind of performance, and whoever's talking the most must be in control. But psychology shows us something completely different. Real intelligence isn't about performing, it's about processing. It's that quiet ability to see the reality that everyone else is too busy performing to even notice, leaving them, well, functionally blind to what's happening right in front of them.
Okay, so let's dive into this. Genuine intelligence is often silent. It's watching, it's analyzing, and it gets that a room tells you way more in its pauses and its little shifts than it ever does in its noise. While other people are scrambling to be seen, the quiet observer is the one who's actually seeing. So if this incredible observational power is a sign of high intelligence,
Right? Why does a mind that sees so much often feel so disconnected, so mentally drained? Well, that's the big question we're going to unpack right here.
So let's kick things off by looking at what's really going on inside the mind of a highly observant person when they're in a social setting. Because you see, there's this internal conflict that most people are just completely unaware of.
Our brains are wired in a pretty fascinating way. For most people, when they walk into a room, their brain defaults to what you could call survival mode. It's all about impulse, emotion, and immediate reactions. That fear of being judged, that urge to respond instantly. But the kind of deep observation we're talking about, the skill to actually read a room, well, that needs a conscious shift into reasoning mode. And this is a much more deliberate, analytical state that, frankly, most people never get to because they're stuck just reacting.
And this is where the dilemma really kicks in. For the intelligent observer, this whole thing creates what's called a social mismatch. You might feel totally alone in a packed room, not because you don't like people, but because you just can't find that mental resonance in all the surface-level small talk. It is draining. And then afterwards, your mind just refuses to switch off. It replays every conversation, analyzes every little detail, and leaves you feeling completely exhausted. This isn't a social flaw, it's just the price of a brain that's always working overtime.
So, how in the world do you manage this? The key isn't to try and shut your brain down. That's not going to work. It's to harness its power. And that all starts with mastering one single, powerful mental tool. In psychology, they call it cognitive inhibition, but honestly, we can just call it the pause. This is the absolutely crucial skill that separates a simple reaction from a true observation. It's that mental gap you create where, instead of getting sucked into the emotion of the moment, you stop, you zoom out, and you choose how to respond. Let's break down exactly how this works. Okay, so something happens, that's your stimulus. Immediately, your brain fires off an automatic impulse. Now here's the game changer. Most people just follow that impulse, right? But the observer inserts a new step right here, the pause. In that tiny little moment of stillness, you create the space to shift from that chaotic survival mode into reasoning mode. It's in that gap that real intelligence takes over, and it allows you to form a deliberate, controlled response instead of just reacting.
And what's really fascinating is that, for a lot of people, this skill wasn't learned in some class. Nope, it was forged in childhood. If you grew up in a place where you had to be hyper-aware of emotional shifts just to feel safe, maybe as a kid whose feelings were often ignored, your brain got trained in observation. You learned to read tones and body language not as a fun hobby, but as a flat-out survival mechanism.
Okay, so we've got the theory down. Now let's see how this actually works in the real world, and how you can use it to turn social situations from something that causes you stress into a source of incredible information. Here is a perfect example of this shift in action. A reactive person might see someone laugh during a serious moment and immediately think, wow, they're being so disrespectful. But an observer? They see a release valve. They get that when emotional tension gets way too high, the nervous system just looks for the fastest way to get back into balance. That laughter isn't a sign of disrespect at all. It's the sign of a brain that's overwhelmed and just trying to protect itself.
The same thing applies to your internal monologue, that voice in your head. This is something called cognitive distancing. You stop using that emotionally charged language inside your own mind. So instead of thinking, this person is attacking me, which just triggers your survival mode, you shift to neutral, analytical language like, okay, this is inconvenient, what can I adjust? This one simple change keeps your brain in problem-solving mode instead of panic mode.
And what happens over time is you start to see this observational skill actually free you from social pressure. You begin to value depth over display. You start to rely on your own internal standards, not on what other people think. You care more about how things work than how they look. And you become genuinely comfortable being out of sync with trends because your validation comes from understanding, not from fitting in.
So this all leads to a really crucial point. The answer here isn't to try and be more outgoing or to shut down your analytical mind. The real answer is to embrace the quiet, to find your power in the stillness.
So how do we actually put this into practice? Well, first, start using silence as a kind of mental training. Just sit in a room without feeling that constant need to perform or speak. That's when your brain gets to enter its deep processing mode. It's also really important to accept that high intelligence doesn't make life easier. In fact, it often makes it heavier, more complex. Stop fighting that. And finally, work on developing that silent strength of someone who doesn't need to rely on temporary support. Trust your own observations about everything else.
Look, if all of this feels deeply, deeply familiar to you, I really want you to hear this. Your struggles are not flaws. They are the cost of depth. You aren't too much or too sensitive. You are simply processing reality on a level that the world isn't really built for and definitely doesn't always expect. And that is a strength, not a weakness.
So I'm going to leave you with a final thought to take with you. The next time you walk into a room, I want you to shift your goal. Don't try to be the most interesting person there. Instead, try to be the most interested. Find the pause. Look for the pattern. Because once you truly understand the minds around you, you start seeing everything in a whole new light.